They told you civilization began with Egypt, with Mesopotamia, with kings, temples, and the first scratchings of law on clay. They lied. Before pharaohs raised their pyramids, before Babylon etched its codes, another world pulsed in silence along the industry cities of brick, vast and planned, laid out like a riddle only the dead could read. Streets and grids, drains that swallowed filth, wells piercing deep into the earth, order from chaos, carved by hands whose names are ash. No kings, no empires, no armies etched on stone, only the trace of a people who built the first great cities, then vanished like smoke. 1,000 seals whisper from the ruins, marked with a script no living eye can break. Strange beasts stare back, half known, half imagined, guardians of a language buried in silence. Clay figurines of mothers, a horned figure brooding in meditation, a great bath, still glistening with the memory of ritual. And then the collapse, cities abandoned, wells choked with dust, the Sarasvati swallowed by drought, rivers shifting, walls crumbling, trade routes bleeding into nothing. A civilization erased without a war, without a scream. You hold its ghost in your hands now. The Indus still breathes, buried under time, daring you to look closer. Civilization did not rise in an instant. It did not appear first in the shadow of pyramids or between the rivers of Mesopotamia. Long before the Indus Valley cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro rose from baked brick, the ground was prepared by quiet hands, steady labor, and relentless adaptation to the land. The story begins not with monuments, but with settlements like Mehrgarh, where the first whispers of the Indus world can still be traced. Mehrgarh, lying at the foot of the Bolan Pass in present-day Balochistan, was founded around 7000 BCE. It is one of the earliest farming communities in South Asia, and its remains carry the first clear evidence of a people transforming wild landscape into cultivated order. The inhabitants of Mehrgarh shifted from hunting and gathering to a settled agricultural life. They planted barley and wheat, domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats, and built mud-brick houses arranged in simple blocks. These were no longer transient shelters. They were permanent homes, anchored to soil that they plowed and irrigated with ingenuity. Within these mud walls, a revolution in human history had begun. Burials at Mehrgarh show more than subsistence. Graves contained ornaments of seashell, turquoise, and lapis lazuli. Some of these stones originated hundreds of kilometers away, carried through networks of exchange that stretched across mountains and deserts. Trade existed here long before the cities of Mesopotamia turned commerce into written contracts. Mehrgarh demonstrates that the Indus people, even in their earliest phase, were already reaching outward, establishing the threads of contact that would later bind their civilization into the fabric of the ancient world. From 5500 to 4000 BCE, Mehrgarh expanded. Its inhabitants experimented with copper tools, created pottery decorated with geometric motifs, and carved small figurines of women, often interpreted as symbols of fertility. This was not yet the urban age, but the patterns of thought and craft were already forming. By 4000 BCE, evidence shows a gradual migration eastward, as communities spread toward the Indus River and its tributaries. The stage was shifting, the fertile plains calling. The geography of the Indus region was its greatest inheritance. Stretching across what is today Pakistan and northwestern India, the Indus River and its web of tributaries offered life in abundance. Seasonal floods enriched the soil with silt, creating fields that could yield harvest after harvest. Unlike the narrow valley of the Nile, the Indus system sprawled wide, offering multiple centers of settlement and growth. From the mountains in the north to the Arabian Sea in the south, the land became a mosaic of villages, each sustaining itself and feeding into something larger. By 3300 BCE, the so-called early Harappan phase began. Small farming villages grew into regional centers. Pottery became standardized, showing a shared cultural horizon. Settlements like Kot Diji revealed fortifications and planned layouts, the faint outlines of urbanism taking shape. The techniques of irrigation advanced, allowing surplus food production. Surplus meant stability, and stability meant population growth. What began as scattered communities started to cohere into a civilization with its own rhythm. This was the same era when Egypt was laying its first mastabas and Mesopotamia was carving its earliest city-states into clay. Yet, along the Indus, something different was unfolding. There was no single ruler stamping authority into stone. No grand inscriptions boasting of conquest. Instead, there was an emerging order that expressed itself in standardization. Bricks of uniform size, weights carved to exact measures, designs on pottery that carried a common style across hundreds of miles. Authority here was not proclaimed by kings. It was embedded in the very system of daily life. By 2600 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization entered its mature phase. The transition from village to city had reached its climax. Harappa in the north, Mohenjo-Daro in the south, Dhalavira in Gujarat, Lothal near the coast. These were not clusters of huts but vast urban centers. They were built with precision, their streets arranged in grids, their drainage systems engineered with foresight, their walls raised to protect and organize. This leap was not spontaneous. It was the culmination of millennia of settlement stretching back to Mehrgar. The rivers were the silent architects of this transformation. The Indus itself, running for 3,180 kilometers from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea, provided the artery of life. Its tributaries, the Ravi, Beas, Chenab, Sutlej, and Jhelum, spread fertility across the Punjab plains. To the east, the now vanished Sarasvati, fed by glacial waters, once nourished settlements that rivaled Harappa in scale. Archaeological surveys reveal that hundreds of sites dotted these riverbanks, from small hamlets to sprawling towns. Each one was a cell in the body of a civilization that was larger in extent than both Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Trade routes radiated outward from these centers. To the west lay the passes of Baluchistan, leading into Iran and Mesopotamia. To the south, the coast opened to maritime exchange with Oman and beyond. Carnelian beads from the Indus have been found in Mesopotamian cities like Ur, while Mesopotamian texts mention a distant land called Maluha, widely believed to be the Indus region. The movement of goods was constant. Timber, ivory, lapis lazuli, copper, and cotton, the latter cultivated here for the first time in the world. These were not isolated farmers, but people bound into a network that linked South Asia to the larger ancient world. While Egypt raised its pyramids under the authority of divine kings and Mesopotamia built its ziggurats under the command of godlike rulers, the Indus Valley built cities where power was diffused, harder to trace. The absence of palaces and monumental temples suggests a form of governance unlike its contemporaries. Yet, the order was undeniable. Uniform systems of weights and measures across a territory of over 1 million square kilometers demanded coordination. Urban planning on such a scale required collective vision. Whatever the form of rule, it was effective, disciplined, and enduring. The rise of the Indus was not inevitable. It was the result of adaptation to a landscape that was both generous and treacherous. The rivers flooded, sometimes nourishing, sometimes destroying. The plains could yield abundance, but they demanded knowledge of timing, of water, of soil. For thousands of years, the people of the Indus adjusted, shifted, rebuilt, and carried forward. From Mehrgar to Harappa, from barley fields to brick cities, they created one of the world's first great civilizations. The world remembers the names of pharaohs and kings, but the Indus remains voiceless. No ruler's name survives. No victory is inscribed on stone. Only the evidence of order remains. Bricks aligned, drains running straight, fields harvested, seals carved. The birth of this civilization is not written in triumphal monuments but in the quiet accumulation of detail. Farming villages hardened into towns, towns sharpened into cities, cities stretched into a civilization that spanned centuries. The Indus Valley Civilization did not announce itself. It grew like a shadow lengthening with the sun, silent but unstoppable, until its cities stood as the largest and most sophisticated of the ancient world, side by side with Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet entirely its own. And still, at its core, the memory of Mehrgar lingered, the small settlement where people first pressed seeds into earth and set the course of history in motion. When the Indus Valley Civilization reached its height between 2600 and 1900 BCE, it achieved something no other culture of its age had mastered with such precision. cities engineered as though drawn from a single blueprint. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dhalavira, Lathal, each name is now a monument not to kings or conquests, but to order itself. These were not accidental clusters of houses that grew without thought. They were deliberate, calculated, standardized. Every line of brick, every channel of water, every courtyard and street bears witness to a civilization obsessed with structure. At Harappa, in present-day Punjab, the ground still carries the imprint of their design. The city was divided into two distinct mounds, a raised citadel to the west and a larger lower town to the east. This division was not arbitrary. The citadel contained monumental structures, granaries, assembly halls, fortified walls that suggest authority and organization. The lower town stretched in wide streets, each running straight, intersecting at right angles to form a grid. No other contemporary civilization applied such mathematical clarity to its cities. The effect is unmistakable. An urban landscape conceived in advance, laid out with intention, not the product of gradual chance. Mohenjo-Daro in Sindh was no less remarkable. Rising from the floodplains of the Indus, it was one of the largest cities of the ancient world, covering over 250 hectares. Its core followed the same principles as Harappa: citadel and lower town, grids of streets, systematic drainage. Yet Mohenjo-Daro revealed something even more startling: the Great Bath. Constructed of baked bricks sealed with bitumen, measuring 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and over 2 meters deep, it was equipped with a sophisticated system of inlets and outlets to fill and drain water. Around it were smaller rooms, possibly for ritual or civic use. No structure of its kind existed in Egypt or Mesopotamia at the same time. This was not a temple in the sense of towering ziggurats, nor a palace flaunting royal wealth. It was a communal installation, meticulously engineered, demanding collective labor, serving collective need. At Dhalavira, in present-day Gujarat, the ingenuity of the Indus people took another form. Situated in a dry, arid environment on the island of Kadir, the city was built with monumental walls of stone, an exception in a culture dominated by brick. But more striking than its architecture was its water management system. Massive reservoirs were cut directly into bedrock to collect rainwater and seasonal flows. Canals directed the water into these tanks, ensuring survival in an environment where rainfall was uncertain. Here was urban planning adapted with intelligence to geography, a mastery of hydraulic engineering centuries before Roman aqueducts. Lathal, also in Gujarat, carried the Indus genius to the sea. It contained what archaeologists identify as one of the world's earliest dockyards. Measuring 214 meters long and 36 meters wide, the basin was connected by a channel to the Sabarmati River, giving access to the Arabian Sea. Goods could be loaded and unloaded with precision. Combined with standardized weights and seals found on site, Lathal demonstrates how the Indus civilization integrated urban design with economic networks, creating a hub that tied inland production to maritime exchange. All of this rested on one essential material: the baked brick. Unlike Mesopotamia, where sun-dried bricks dominated, the Indus builders relied heavily on kiln-fired bricks of uniform ratio, typically 1:2:4 in thickness, width, and length. This consistency was not local. It stretched across the entire civilization. From Harappa in the north to Mohenjo-Daro in the south, from Dhalavira to Lathal, the bricks carried the same proportions. Standardization at such a scale implies not just shared technology but a shared cultural logic, a system in which measurement, proportion, and durability were guiding principles. Yet the Indus builders did not stop at bricks. Their urban landscapes were tied together by one of the most sophisticated drainage systems in the ancient world. Every major street in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had covered drains running parallel to the road. These were constructed with brick, fitted with inspection holes, and linked to soak pits and cesspools for filtration. Houses were connected directly to this network. Wastewater from bathrooms flowed into covered channels that ran beneath the streets, carrying sewage away from living areas. Even smaller lanes possessed drainage. The system was not symbolic. It was practical, relentless, and efficient, pointing to a civic order that prioritized hygiene and collective welfare. Public wells dotted the cities, ensuring access to water. In Mohenjo-Daro alone, archaeologists have identified over 700 wells, many lined with perfectly fitted bricks. These wells were not reserved for elites. They appeared throughout residential blocks, close to ordinary houses, indicating that water was a right accessible to all. At Harappa, large reservoirs and water tanks supplemented the supply, while in Dalavira, massive cisterns ensured survival in arid conditions. Water was not only managed, it was distributed equitably, an achievement rare in the annals of ancient civilizations. Granaries add another layer to the portrait. At Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, massive platforms of brick supported rows of brick chambers. These are widely interpreted as granaries, used for storing surplus grain. The size of these installations indicates surplus management on a scale far beyond the needs of individual households. This surplus was likely redistributed for trade, labor organization, and civic stability. The design also suggests knowledge of ventilation, with air ducts to keep grain dry and pest-free. Such structures are not evidence of centralized kingship as in Egypt, but they reveal a coordinated civic administration capable of planning food security for tens of thousands. The streets themselves spoke of planning. At Mohenjo-Daro, the main avenues were over 9 meters wide, broad enough to allow movement of carts and animals. Smaller streets branched off at precise right angles, leading into residential blocks. Houses were built of uniform brick, often with courtyards, kitchens, and bathrooms. Two-story constructions were common. Some houses included private wells and bathing platforms connected directly to drains. Privacy, sanitation, and order were embedded into the architecture of daily life. The uniformity across cities scattered over 1 million square kilometers is staggering. The same measurements of bricks, the same weights, the same seals, the same street grids. This was not coincidence. It was cultural coherence at a scale unprecedented in antiquity. Egypt centralized order in its kings, Mesopotamia in its temple states, but the Indus Valley centralized it in the very bones of its cities. Archaeology has revealed no palaces, no monumental statues of rulers, no ostentatious tombs. Yet the cities breathe authority. The authority was not carved in stone inscriptions. It was pressed into every brick laid in perfect proportion, every drain fitted beneath the streets, every granary designed to feed mouths unknown. This was governance by structure itself, by the relentless application of order into every corner of urban space. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dalavira, Lothal, each was unique in its adaptation to geography, yet all were bound together by a single architectural grammar. These were cities where fire-hardened bricks defined permanence, where streets ran like veins, where water was harnessed with mastery, where life pulsed not in the name of kings but in the architecture of order itself. And in their silence, they stand even now, challenging every assumption of what the first great civilizations were meant to be. The lifeblood of the Indus Valley Civilization was not only its cities of brick and stone, but the rhythm of daily labor that pulsed through its fields, workshops, and markets. Agriculture was the foundation, and from it flowed surplus, wealth, and exchange that bound this civilization into one of the largest networks of the ancient world. In the floodplains of the Indus and its tributaries, farmers coaxed abundance from fertile soil. Wheat and barley were staples, cultivated with skill that had matured over millennia since the early settlements of Mergar. Evidence from charred grains, storage facilities, and farming tools reveals systematic agriculture on a scale that could feed tens of thousands. Alongside cereals grew pulses like lentils and peas. Rice, though limited in the early phases, began to appear by the later centuries. Cotton was perhaps their most striking agricultural achievement. By 3000 BCE, the Indus people were weaving textiles from cotton, the earliest known use of the plant in the world. Fragments of woven cloth found at sites like Mohenjo-Daro prove that textiles were not only functional but a valued craft. Cotton fabrics may have been exported abroad, their fine weaving prized by distant markets. Animal husbandry complemented crop production. Cattle, water buffalo, sheep, goats, and pigs were kept in large numbers, providing meat, milk, hides, and labor for plowing. The humped zebu cattle, frequently depicted on Indus seals, was a vital component of their economy. Domesticated chickens, first evidenced in this region, also contributed to diet and trade. Agriculture and animal rearing formed a stable base, but it was trade that propelled the Indus Valley into contact with the wider ancient world. Archaeological evidence reveals long-distance commerce extending westward to Mesopotamia. Indus seals, distinctive square stamps carved with animals and inscriptions, have been unearthed in cities like Ur, Lagash, and Susa. Mesopotamian texts from around 2300 BCE mention a distant land called Meluha, widely believed to be the Indus region. These records describe Meliahan ships docking at Mesopotamian ports, bringing goods of wood, ivory, lapis lazuli, carnelian beads, and cotton textiles. In return, the Indus received silver, tin, wool, and perhaps olive oil. The dockyard at Lathal in Gujarat, one of the earliest known in the world, was part of this vast exchange network, a hub that connected riverine and maritime trade. Standardization lay at the core of this system. Across thousands of kilometers, the Indus employed precise weights and measures. Cubical stone weights, typically made from chert, followed a binary system 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 units, with the base unit around 13.7 grams. This uniformity held across sites from Harappa to Dhalavira, enabling trade and taxation with remarkable consistency. Measures extended beyond weights to brick proportions, pottery designs, and even city planning, revealing a society bound together by shared systems of order. Such precision was not the work of isolated merchants but reflected centralized oversight, or at the very least a cultural consensus powerful enough to enforce uniformity across a vast civilization. Within the cities, artisans produced goods that reflected both utility and artistry. Pottery, often wheel-made, was decorated with black designs on red surfaces, geometric motifs, animal figures, and occasionally human forms. These ceramics were mass-produced for everyday use but also carried aesthetic detail. Bead-making reached extraordinary refinement. Carnelian, agate, steatite, faience, and shell were shaped into beads of uniform size, polished to a sheen, and drilled with tiny holes using specialized tools. The scale of production suggests not only domestic use but large-scale trade, as such beads have been found far from the Indus. Jewelry was another mark of their skill. Gold, silver, and semi-precious stones were combined into necklaces, bangles, and earrings. At Mohenjo-Daro, a burial revealed a woman adorned with a necklace of 176 gold beads, 3 agate beads, and 2 pendants of jade. Ornaments were not limited to elites. Bangles of terracotta, faience, and shell have been found in abundance, suggesting widespread access. Ivory combs, copper mirrors, and small cosmetic containers point to personal grooming and a concern with appearance. Even toys, uncovered in the form of miniature carts, whistles shaped like birds, and animal figurines with movable heads, speak of a society that made space for leisure and childhood. Diet was varied and grounded in agricultural abundance. Grains such as wheat, barley, and millet were staples. Lentils, chickpeas, and peas provided protein. Animal bones suggest the consumption of beef, mutton, goat, pork, and poultry. Fish and turtle remains from sites near rivers and coasts indicate that aquatic resources were significant. Milk products likely played a central role, as evidenced by cattle herding and churns found in excavations. Food preparation tools, grinders, querns, mortars, are found in households, hinting at daily routines of grinding grain and cooking. Evidence of sesame oil and mustard seeds shows that flavoring agents were already in use. Clothing, though rarely preserved, can be reconstructed through indirect evidence. The presence of spindle whorls and loom weights indicates spinning and weaving. Cotton cloth fragments from Mohenjo-Daro confirm textile production. Terracotta figurines and seals depict men with draped garments resembling cloaks or shawls, while women are shown wearing skirts or wrapped cloth. Ornaments, from bangles to elaborate headdresses, complemented attire. Hairstyles appear carefully styled, with hair combed, braided, or tied, reflecting a concern with presentation in both daily life and ritual contexts. Craft specialization was widespread. Workshops have been uncovered in cities, where artisans worked on beads, pottery, metallurgy, and shell carving. At Lathal, entire districts were devoted to beadmaking, with furnaces, drill bits, and waste material providing evidence of large-scale industry. Metallurgy included copper and bronze tools, knives, chisels, saws, needles, crafted with precision. Gold and silver were shaped into delicate ornaments. Unlike Mesopotamia and Egypt, the Indus left little evidence of weapons beyond simple spearheads and arrowheads, suggesting that metallurgy was directed more toward crafts and tools than warfare. Social life, though lacking monumental inscriptions or royal records, can be glimpsed through material remains. The uniformity of housing sizes suggests relative social equality, though differences existed. Some houses were larger, with private wells and multiple rooms, while others were small and modest. Yet all were constructed from the same brick proportions, tied into the same drainage systems, hinting at a shared standard of living. The absence of grand palaces or extravagant tombs stands in stark contrast to Egypt's pyramids or Mesopotamia's ziggurats. Authority, if it existed in hierarchical form, expressed itself through collective infrastructure rather than individual monuments. Leisure is reflected in games and recreation. Dice made of terracotta, gaming boards incised on stone slabs, and small figurines indicate that play was part of urban life. The presence of carefully designed toys demonstrates attention to children's lives and suggests cultural value placed on entertainment and learning. Through every artifact, every grain of charred wheat, every seal stamped with symbols still unreadable, the Indus Valley Civilization speaks of a society both practical and refined. Its agriculture sustained, its trade expanded, its artisans crafted, and its people lived in cities that prioritized not only survival but organization, craft, and culture. Trade carried its goods to distant lands. Standardized weights and measures enforced precision. Beads, jewelry, and toys filled lives with texture. Fields and flocks fed the masses. What remains in the archaeological record is not chaos but a carefully maintained order, lived through daily routines, shaped by craftspeople, farmers, merchants, and families whose names are lost but whose work still endures in the soil and stone of their cities. The Indus Valley Civilization speaks in silence. Its cities stand without inscriptions of kings, its monuments without proclamations, its temples without hymns carved in stone. Yet scattered across seals, pottery, tablets, and fragments are symbols, short inscriptions, animal motifs, geometric signs, tantalizing evidence of a script that has resisted every attempt at interpretation. More than 4,000 examples of these markings have been recovered, most inscribed on steatite seals used in trade and administration, others scratched into pottery shards or copper tablets. The script is composed of roughly 400 distinct signs, some recurring with patterns that suggest grammar and syntax. Yet no bilingual text has been found, no Rosetta Stone bridging the gulf. Scholars debate whether it represents a fully developed writing system, a protoscript, or a symbolic code tied to trade and ritual. Some propose links to Dravidian languages. Others argue for connections to early Indo-Aryan or even an independent linguistic family. Attempts at decipherment stretch back to the early 20th century, but none command consensus. What remains is an enigma, a literate civilization whose words are forever sealed. The seals themselves are striking, not only for their inscriptions, but for the images that accompany them. Carved in miniature, they depict animals: bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, water buffalo, goats, and occasionally composite creatures that seem to belong to both real and imagined worlds. The most famous is the so-called Proto-Shiva seal, unearthed at Mohenjo-Daro, showing a horned, seated figure with arms outstretched, surrounded by animals. Some scholars interpret this as an early form of the Hindu god Shiva in his aspect as Pashupati, lord of beasts. The figure sits cross-legged, a posture reminiscent of yogic meditation. Whether this was a deity, a cultural symbol, or a mythological archetype, it reveals a religious imagination that later traditions may have inherited and transformed. Equally widespread are terracotta figurines, many depicting female forms with exaggerated features, interpreted as fertility symbols or representations of a mother goddess. These figurines, found in households across the Indus cities, suggest domestic rituals tied to fertility, abundance, and continuity of life. Male figurines exist as well, but the prominence of female images indicates the centrality of fertility cults. Cattle, too, appear frequently in symbolic contexts, reflecting their importance not only in subsistence but in spiritual life. Among the grand urban features, the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro stands as the most direct evidence of ritual practice. Built on the Citadel Mound, measuring 12 by 7 meters and over 2 meters deep, its floor was lined with tightly fitted bricks sealed with bitumen to make it watertight. Water was supplied from a well and drained through a corbelled arch outlet into the surrounding streets. Surrounding chambers suggest dressing rooms or ritual spaces. The structure's purpose is debated, but the scale and care of construction point to collective ceremonial use, possibly purification rituals or communal gatherings. Unlike Mesopotamian temples or Egyptian pyramids, the Great Bath was not a monument to rulers but a civic structure tied to religious or social rites. Its presence reflects a spiritual system embedded in public life. Speculation about governance arises from these same material traces. The absence of palaces or obvious royal iconography has puzzled archaeologists. At Mohenjo-Daro, a notable artifact is the so-called priest-king statue, a bearded male figure carved in steatite, wearing a patterned robe with trefoil designs in white paste. His calm expression and dignified bearing suggest authority, yet he is small, only 17 centimeters tall. Whether he represents an actual leader, a priest, or a symbolic figure remains unresolved. Unlike Egypt, where pharaohs inscribed their names across stone and bronze, the Indus left no rulers in the archaeological record. One theory proposes that the Indus cities were governed by councils, possibly merchant or civic assemblies, rather than monarchs. Another suggests a theocratic system led by priests who oversaw both ritual and administration. Yet another sees evidence of collective rule, a distributed form of governance where authority was shared across communities. The standardized bricks, weights, measures, and city layouts imply central coordination, but the absence of royal propaganda suggests a different political imagination, one where power rested not in a single individual but in a system. The cultural echoes of the Indus extend into later Indian traditions. The seated figure on the Proto-Shiva seal resonates with later depictions of Shiva as ascetic yogi and lord of animals. Fertility figurines parallel later goddess worship, from the Vedic goddesses to the mother cults of Hinduism. Ritual bathing, exemplified by the Great Bath, finds continuity in the centrality of water in Hindu ritual life, from river pilgrimages to purification before worship. Even the emphasis on sacred animals, especially cattle, foreshadows their enduring role in Indian religious culture. Yet the Indus remains elusive. Its script resists comprehension. Its symbols hover between interpretation and silence. Without texts, the meaning of its beliefs must be drawn from images, artifacts, and structures. The seals whisper of trade and ritual. The figurines speak of fertility and devotion. The Great Bath suggests collective rites. The statue of the so-called priest-king hints at governance, yet no names are recorded, no myths preserved in writing. It is a civilization where belief is glimpsed through fragments, where symbols carry the weight of words never written, where silence is as significant as evidence. The Indus Valley Civilization built cities of unmatched precision, but it also shaped systems of thought and ritual whose traces linger thousands of years later. Its script remains undeciphered, its gods unnamed, its rulers invisible. But in the seals, the figurines, the baths, and the statues, its spirit endures, not as a solved puzzle, but as a question pressed into clay and brick, unanswered yet unforgotten. The Indus Valley Civilization was not only a society of orderly streets and standardized bricks. It was a civilization that harnessed science and technology with relentless precision. Its achievements were not ornamental displays of power but practical systems woven into the daily lives of its people. Innovations that defined survival, prosperity, and connection across a vast and challenging landscape. Between 2600 and 1900 BCE, the people of Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dhalavira, and Lothal engineered solutions that placed them centuries ahead of many of their contemporaries. Metallurgy lay at the core of their technological strength. The Indus artisans mastered copper and bronze working, producing tools that carried efficiency into every field of labor. Copper chisels, saws, drills, spearheads, and arrowheads were forged with precision, used for woodworking, farming, and construction. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, strengthened these tools, allowing for greater durability and effectiveness. Unlike in Mesopotamia, where metallurgy was often directed toward weaponry, the Indus emphasis leaned toward utility. Workshops uncovered in Mohenjo-Daro reveal furnaces, slag, and molds, evidence of organized metallurgical production. Gold and silver were also worked, primarily into ornaments. Thin sheets of hammered gold, delicate earrings, and necklaces reflect an ability not just to shape metals, but to refine them to an aesthetic standard. The bead makers of the Indus reached levels of technical mastery still astonishing today. Carnelian beads were heated to produce a deep red color, then drilled with holes so fine they required specialized drills tipped with hard stone. The uniformity of size and polish across beads found at distant sites demonstrates not individual artisans alone but large-scale, coordinated industry. Engineering skill was not limited to metallurgy. It extended to the very bones of their cities. Nowhere in the ancient world was water managed with the same combination of foresight and precision. In Mohenjo-Daro, every household was connected to a system of water supply and disposal. Wells, more than 700, have been identified, provided direct access to groundwater. Most houses contain their own private wells or shared access to nearby public wells, ensuring independence of supply. Bathrooms were constructed within houses, with sloped floors leading wastewater into drains that connected to street-level channels. These drains were covered with removable slabs for maintenance and inspection. Larger streets contained wider drains with soak pits to filter solid waste before water continued downstream. The system was continuous, coherent, and astonishingly modern, a network ensuring both hygiene and civic health at a scale unprecedented in the Bronze Age. Dhalavira added another layer to this engineering brilliance. Located in the arid Rann of Kutch, where rainfall was scarce and rivers unreliable, the inhabitants carved massive reservoirs into bedrock to capture and store seasonal water. Channels directed rainwater and runoff into these cisterns, ensuring survival in a landscape where life otherwise would have withered. The sheer scale of these reservoirs, some stretching over 70 meters in length, demonstrates planning at the level of civil engineering. In Dhalavira, water was not merely stored. It was managed through a carefully integrated system of dams, channels, and tanks. This ingenuity turned an inhospitable environment into a thriving urban center. Lathal extended this innovation into maritime engineering. Built near the Gulf of Kumbat, Lathal contained one of the world's earliest known dockyards, a massive basin measuring approximately 214 meters by 36 meters. Connected to the Sabarmati River through a channel, it allowed ships to enter and unload cargo directly into the city. The dockyard's walls, built of kiln-fired brick, were designed to withstand water pressure and seasonal shifts. Adjacent warehouses suggest that goods were stored, cataloged, and redistributed, making Lathal a critical node in long-distance trade. This was engineering in service of commerce, integrating land and sea into one system of exchange. Urban planning itself was a technological achievement. The grid-like layouts of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were not accidental. Streets were laid out with mathematical precision, running north-south and east-west, intersecting at right angles. This orientation suggests knowledge of geometry and perhaps astronomical alignment. Residential blocks were arranged systematically, each containing courtyards, kitchens, and access to water and drainage. The citadels housed granaries, assembly halls, and baths, elevated on platforms to protect against floods. This was not only architecture. It was civil engineering, an understanding of how to integrate social, economic, and environmental needs into a coherent urban plan. Unlike Egypt, where monumental architecture proclaimed the power of kings, or Mesopotamia, where ziggurats towered over cities, the Indus invested their engineering in infrastructure that served the collective. Agriculture, the foundation of their economy, reveals the same technological sophistication. The fertile plains of the Indus and Sarasvati rivers offered abundance, but abundance required control. Farmers used plows, likely drawn by oxen, to cultivate wheat, barley, and pulses. Irrigation systems channeled river water into fields, ensuring surplus even in less favorable seasons. Evidence from sites such as Kalibangan shows fields laid out in furrows, suggesting organized agricultural planning. Surplus production enabled urban growth, sustaining populations estimated in tens of thousands within single cities. It also fed into trade, providing goods for exchange both within the Indus network and abroad. Cotton, cultivated and woven into textiles, marked a global first, and the technology of spinning and weaving spread outward from the Indus, shaping economies far beyond its borders. Standardization was the silent engine behind all these innovations. Bricks across the civilization followed uniform ratios, typically 1 to 2 to 4 in thickness, width, and length. Weights carved from chert adhered to a binary scale, from small units of 1.7 grams to larger weights exceeding 10 kilograms. This uniformity was critical in trade, construction, and governance, ensuring consistency across a territory stretching more than 1 million square kilometers. Such precision implies not just technological ability but an administrative framework capable of enforcing it across hundreds of settlements. The Indus mastery of science and technology was not isolated to elite contexts. It was embedded in ordinary life. Drainage ran beneath every street. Wells stood within every neighborhood. Standardized pottery filled every household. Toys shaped from terracotta, whistles, carts with rolling wheels, all reflected technical skill applied not only to survival but to leisure. Even play bore the imprint of craft. Their technological edge was also visible in faience production, a glazed material created by firing silica mixed with alkalis. Beads, amulets, and figurines of bright blue-green faience demonstrate chemical knowledge and control of firing techniques. Faience workshops at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro produced objects in bulk, suggesting mass production supported by standardized procedures. This knowledge of pyrotechnology, combining fire, minerals, and chemistry, echoes through every artifact. Every achievement of the Indus Valley Civilization was rooted in the practical but elevated to the systemic. Metallurgy produced not just tools but industries. Water systems sustained not just households but entire urban populations. Dockyards and reservoirs connected distant lands and harsh environments into networks of survival and trade. Urban grids, standardized weights, and agricultural planning were not scattered innovations but parts of an integrated whole, evidence of a civilization that placed science and engineering at the heart of its existence. Between 1900 and 1300 BCE, the vast network of the Indus Valley Civilization, once stretching across more than 1 million square kilometers, began to lose its cohesion. The cities that had thrived for centuries, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dhalavira, Lothal, saw their monumental order dissolve into fragments. It was not a sudden collapse marked by fire or conquest, but a slow unraveling that left behind traces of decline in every layer of soil, pottery, and abandoned street. The rhythm of urban life that had endured for nearly 700 years faltered, replaced by smaller, scattered settlements that no longer bore the same precision or scale. One of the most significant factors was environmental change. Geological and climatic studies point to the drying up of the Sarasvati River, a river praised in the Rigveda centuries later as mighty and life-giving. Once fed by glacial meltwaters from the Himalayas, its flow began to diminish around 2000 BCE due to tectonic activity that altered drainage patterns. As its waters withdrew, settlements along its banks were left exposed, their fertile fields reduced to dust. The Gagarhakra region, once dense with towns, shows archaeological evidence of abandonment during this period. Simultaneously, shifts in monsoon patterns are recorded in climate data. Rainfall weakened, becoming erratic, reducing the water supply that sustained agriculture on which the civilization depended. Flooding, paradoxically, also played a role. At Mohenjo-Daro, layers of silt discovered during excavations indicate repeated floods. The Indus River, swelling with Himalayan snowmelt and seasonal rains, could no longer be controlled by the city's drainage and embankments. These floods did not destroy the city in one blow but returned again and again, forcing people to rebuild on higher platforms until eventually the effort outweighed the reward. The cycles of flood and drought, alternating extremes of water and dryness, weakened both the land and the resilience of its people. Agriculture itself began to falter. Centuries of cultivation may have exhausted the soil, reducing its fertility. Irrigation systems dependent on now weakening rivers could not maintain the same surplus as before. Wheat and barley, staples of the Indus diet, suffered under erratic rainfall and shrinking water channels. Cotton, once a major crop that distinguished the Indus as the first civilization known to weave textiles from it, declined as water shortages spread. Without reliable surpluses, urban centers lost their ability to sustain large populations and to maintain trade with distant lands. Trade routes themselves shifted, compounding the strain. For centuries, the Indus exchanged goods with Mesopotamia, seals, beads, ivory, and cotton textiles in return for silver, tin, and wool. Cuneiform records from Mesopotamia mention trade with a land called Meluhha, widely identified with the industry. Yet by around 1900 BCE, references to Meluhha disappear from Mesopotamian records. Changes in Mesopotamia itself, with the decline of the UR3 dynasty and later political disruptions, reduced demand. New trade corridors through Persia and the Gulf bypassed Indus ports like Lathal, eroding their importance. Without its commercial lifelines, the civilization lost one of the pillars that had supported its prosperity. The debate over foreign pressure, particularly the so-called Aryan migration, remains contested. Traditional theories once claimed that Indo-Aryan migrants entered northwestern India around 1500 BCE, bringing with them new languages and cultural traditions. However, archaeology has revealed no signs of mass invasion or widespread destruction of cities that could explain the decline. Instead, evidence suggests a more complex process. As urban life weakened, new groups, perhaps semi-nomadic pastoralists from Central Asia, began interacting with the remnants of the Indus culture. Cultural transitions occurred, but not through the fiery conquest once imagined. What is more certain is that by the late 2nd millennium BCE, the cultural fabric of the Northwest had changed, giving rise to the smaller rural settlements and eventually contributing to the Vedic traditions of later centuries. Within the cities, decline manifested in subtle but undeniable signs. The standardized brick ratios that had defined Indus architecture for centuries began to break down. In Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, later construction used irregular bricks, smaller and poorly fired, reflecting a loss of central control and technical rigor. The great drains, once meticulously maintained, fell into disrepair, clogging with debris. Public structures such as granaries and baths were no longer rebuilt with the same precision. Houses became smaller, suggesting reduced prosperity and shrinking populations. The once proud citadels no longer commanded bustling markets or warehouses stocked with goods for export. Granaries lay abandoned or repurposed, their vast storage halls silent. In Mohenjo-Daro, evidence of overcrowding in later phases indicates that as the city contracted, people clustered into surviving areas, overloading what infrastructure remained. The orderliness of streets gave way to encroached lanes and haphazard structures, a visible symbol of administrative breakdown. As the great cities lost vitality, people dispersed into smaller rural communities. These settlements lacked monumental structures, complex drainage, or standardized planning. Life became localized, dependent on nearby fields and rivers, stripped of the interregional coordination that had once tied the civilization together. Pottery styles changed, reflecting new cultural practices, and weights and measures lost their uniformity, indicating the end of centralized regulation. The Harappan script, already undeciphered and enigmatic, disappears entirely after this period, its symbols no longer pressed into seals or etched on pottery. Literacy, if once widespread, had faded with the decline of urban administration. The process was not uniform. Some cities, like Dhalavira, were abandoned earlier, while others lingered for centuries in diminished form. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro continued to be inhabited, but as shadows of their former selves. By 1300 BCE, the last vestiges of the urban Indus tradition had dissolved, replaced by what scholars call the late Harappan cultures, regional, smaller, and less connected. Yet these later communities retained fragments of their heritage. Motifs in pottery, agricultural practices, and perhaps even ritual ideas that flowed into the evolving cultures of the subcontinent. The decline of the Indus Valley Civilization was not marked by a single event, but by a convergence of forces: climate shifts, geological transformations, agricultural strain, and the redirection of trade. What had once been a civilization of uniformity and integration became fragmented and dispersed. The silence of the abandoned streets, the neglected drains, the unused dockyards, and the vanished script testify not to violent destruction but to the slow erosion of a way of life that had flourished for centuries, sustained by its rivers, its organization, and its technological genius, until those very foundations gave way. The Indus Valley Civilization, though gone for more than 3,000 years, never entirely vanished from the cultural fabric of South Asia. Its legacy is not confined to ruins buried beneath layers of earth, but carried forward in practices, ideas, and motifs that continued long after its cities crumbled. The grid-like precision of its towns, the obsession with standardized measures, the persistence of craft traditions, and the enduring symbols of fertility and divinity became part of the subcontinent's cultural DNA, shaping what followed in ways both visible and subtle. Urban planning, once perfected in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, set patterns that echoed across centuries. Straight streets, intersecting at right angles, drainage channels running beneath thoroughfares, houses organized around courtyards, all features that archaeologists uncovered in the 1920s, were not random achievements but deliberate systems of thought. They spoke of a people who understood order, hygiene, and community responsibility. Later Indian cities, even without conscious imitation, bore the imprint of this planning ethos. The very concept of a city designed with balance and functionality may trace its earliest expression on the subcontinent to the Indus. The weights and measures of the Indus, precise and uniform, reveal a level of standardization unmatched for its time. Cubical stone weights, carefully cut, maintained consistent ratios whether small or large. They allowed traders to transact fairly across vast distances, ensuring trust in commercial exchange. Centuries later, during the Vedic and early historic periods, systems of measurement in India carried traces of this uniformity. The cultural memory of fairness in trade and calibrated exchange, so central to social and economic life, had roots in the practices of the Indus merchants. Motifs carved into seals and pottery survived in transformed forms. The recurring imagery of the peepal tree, sacred then and sacred still in Hindu and Buddhist traditions, links the ancient to the living. The humped bull, shown without a yoke, reappears in later Indian iconography, embodying strength and fertility. The mother goddess figurines, though debated in interpretation, echo through the centuries in the worship of fertility goddesses across South Asia. Even the enigmatic Proto-Shiva seal, with its horned, yogic figure surrounded by animals, finds parallels in later depictions of Shiva as Pashupati, Lord of Beasts. These continuities suggest that the spiritual imagination of the Indus did not vanish but was absorbed, reshaped, and re-expressed by later cultures. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a massive tank built with watertight brickwork, remains one of the most striking symbols of ritual in the ancient world. Its very existence suggests communal practices centered on purification through water, an idea that became foundational in later Indian religions. The sanctity of bathing in rivers like the Ganges, central to Hindu ritual for millennia, may trace its earliest architectural expression to this Indus structure. In such continuities, ritual behavior transcended the fall of cities, binding generations through shared symbols of purity and renewal. Yet perhaps the most enduring mystery is the script. Hundreds of seals, tablets, and pottery fragments carry its symbols, short sequences of geometric signs, animals, and motifs. Despite decades of study, the Indus script remains undeciphered, its language unknown. Some scholars propose that it represents an early Dravidian tongue, ancestors of Tamil and other South Indian languages. Others argue it encodes a lost linguistic branch. Whatever its sound, the script's silence continues to challenge historians. Unlike cuneiform or hieroglyphs, no bilingual inscriptions have been found to unlock its meaning. The absence of long texts, most inscriptions contain fewer than 20 signs, compounds the difficulty. Yet the persistence of its imagery on seals that reached Mesopotamia proves it was a vital medium of communication. The script's endurance as an unsolved puzzle ensures that the Indus remains partly hidden, its voice lost yet tantalizingly close. When the civilization was forgotten, its ruins lay buried under mounds, misidentified by locals as ancient forts or cursed cities. For centuries, its existence was unknown to history. Then, in the 1920s, the silence broke. In 1921, Daya Ramsani, an Indian archaeologist, began excavations at Harappa in Punjab. The following year, R.D. Banerjee uncovered parts of Mohenjo-Daro in Sindh. Their findings astonished the world. In 1924, Sir John Marshall, Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, announced the discovery of a civilization as advanced as Egypt and Mesopotamia, but older in many of its achievements. Streets, drains, seals, and weights revealed not just ruins but an entire forgotten world. For the first time, India's prehistory stretched back to 2600 BCE, to the first great cities that stood with the Nile and the Tigris. The rediscovery reframed the history of the subcontinent. What had been seen as a culture beginning with the Vedic age was suddenly understood as heir to a far older, urbanized tradition. The continuity between the Indus and later India was undeniable. Crafts like beadmaking, still practiced in Gujarat, echo techniques used at Lothal. The making of terracotta figurines, the use of motifs such as the swastika, and even aspects of ritual life trace threads that bind past to present. For the people of the subcontinent, the realization that their ancestors had built these cities offered not just historical knowledge but a profound rerouting of identity. Yet the rediscovery also sharpened the enigma. Why had this civilization, so advanced in planning and engineering, left so little trace in written history? Why had its script fallen silent while others endured? Why did its memory not pass through oral traditions into later epics? These unanswered questions lend the Indus its aura of silence. A silence broken only by bricks, seals, and buried streets, but never by words. Even today, the scale of the Indus astonishes. At its peak, around 2600 to 1900 BCE, it covered an area larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Its cities housed tens of thousands, maintained sanitation unmatched for millennia, and conducted trade across thousands of kilometers. Yet for centuries, it lay forgotten until chance excavation restored it to history. The Indus Valley Civilization was not merely an early society of South Asia. It was one of humanity's first experiments in large-scale urban life. Its legacy lingers not only in material remains but in cultural continuities that shaped what followed. From urban grids to sacred trees, from weights of stone to goddesses of fertility, from baths of purification to the silent script that resists understanding, the Indus never truly disappeared. It endures in fragments, symbols, and traditions, woven into the subcontinent's long history, standing as one of the great foundations of civilization itself.